Yeah, hello and welcome. I am very happy to have you here. My name's Pete Dominic. I want to just start today's show by wishing my big brother a happy birthday, August 23rd. If you're listening, bro, he listens a lot. Happy birthday. I love you. I wouldn't be the person that I am without you. Far from it. My moral compass, my guide, my big brother, my defender, my supporter, my staunchest critic, Brian Dominic. Happy birthday. Love you, bro. And happy anniversary to my mom and dad. That's right. Over the weekend, my parents celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. I'm going to try to get them on as guests this week to talk about what the secret to their success has been, and that's always fun. Chisel D, Married D, mom and dad, we also celebrate you. Thank you very much. I hope you got my gift. Hey, I didn't get him anything. I'm a monster. Okay, and thank you. I celebrate all of you. Welcome to the new subscribers of the show. Scott Donald, James Cranston, Sheila Smith, Adam Gardner, Kara Holmes, Leonard Barry, Karen Hutchinson, Daniel Lindsay, Rick Bruner, Christopher Winfrey, Penelope Diate. I don't know. I don't have time to keep going. Maggie and Mike, Donald Wright, Rick Rees, and more. Lots more. Thank you guys for supporting me here on the podcast. I cannot do it without your subscriptions. Lots to talk about, and with on today's show, I've got Maura, Quint, and James Fallows. Maura joins me every Monday for Maura Mondays. He's an activist and a hilarious writer, brilliant woman joining me on Mondays, and the legendary, won every award, one of the most respected journalists of our time, James Fallows of The Atlantic joins me as well. Two awesome guests and lots of news to discuss with you as well. And also just want to tell you real quick, coming up this week, looks like I might have Bob Saget. We were going back and forth last night. My old friend, he is one of the greatest. I've got Kentucky Sports Radio's most popular personality, Matt Jones. We don't talk about sports. We're talking about politics and culture. Great conversation with Matt. I've got a 3-star retired general, Daniel Bolger, who joins me to talk about why we lost in Afghanistan, and so much more planned for you this week, including another argument with a listener who called me out on Twitter, which is fantastic, and an amazing conversation from a Thursday night hangout. I'm going to share that with everybody, and not just subscribers who were there that night. Just magical moments occurring on Thursday night during our hangout between two Marines, Matthew Ho and Kate Wyatt, who I love. Okay, well, all that coming up this week, but right now it's time to get to, there's just news headlines galore. Time for the last 24. Well, let me just start with the weather, because the elitists here in the Northeast got hammered by Hurricane Henri. Is that how you're supposed to pronounce it? More rain fell in an hour in New York City than ever in the recorded past. And we got hammered with rain ourselves here just north of New York City. 21 people, though, killed and 50 missing in Tennessee flooding. That is the worst news I've seen as a result of this major weather system and hurricane in some places hitting the country. Although, actually, I don't even know. I just made that assumption that the hurricane was where the weather in Tennessee as well, but maybe I'm missing. Either way, awful news coming out of Tennessee. Listener Kim Nyborg, thoughtfully, as always, reached out to me on Sunday morning and just wishing me luck as the hurricane was coming up the Northeast. She said, thinking about you and your family. Hope you guys are staying safe with Henri coming. Of course, my friends in Iowa suffered from a lot of extreme weather events over the past couple of years. And I replied to Kim and said, thanks. I think most of us will die. So far, it's just a light rain, though. And she replied with, well, I'll make sure I have a shitty eulogy prepared, she wrote to me. I responded, make it brief, Kim, but hilarious, please. And her final response, which ended it, she's so funny, she wrote, I'll do what I want. You'll be dead. I love you, Kim. Thank you very much. And everybody else who reached out to me. I'm good. And the rain has stopped here late on Sunday night, at least temporarily. And it wasn't too bad, at least where I live. But the storms of violence have returned to Portland, Oregon. How about that for a segue? There was a bunch of Proud Boys had a rally, but they were like an old Kmart parking lot, but they were outnumbered by counter-protesters led by, I guess, Antifa protest. I almost said members, but I don't want to make it seem like Antifa is that much of an organized organization. I may be wrong about that, but I don't know that there's a membership trial. I don't know. I should learn more about it. I really should. Should have some Antifa identifying folks on the program and talk with them. So there was some crazy violence in Portland, and there were some arrests. Wanted to mention that, but most of what I've got audio-wise is regarding COVID and Afghanistan. So I'll play a few clips for you. We'll get to a news dump, and then it's on to my guests, James Fallows and Maura Quint. But I wanted to start with a Trump clip. So trigger warning, I rarely play him, but this one clip from his Alabama rally over the weekend, I feel like it's kind of worth hearing to hear how he handles the reaction of the audience when he tells them pretty clearly that he got vaccinated and they should too. This is in Alabama. It's Saturday night. Alabama, of course, has a major spike. ICUs are overflowing with victims of COVID. And this asshole brings together thousands of people, granted being a field outside. Nonetheless, to watch him just do his bits. He's got literally has an act. He has a 90-minute act. He plays the hits. It's what he does. And in this case, he backs off. You just have to hear it. Here he is advocating for the vaccine and then realizing, guess what? His people don't like it.
3 days, less than 9 months, and it's great. And you know what? I believe totally in your freedoms. I do. Free, you got to do what you have to do. But I recommend take the vaccines. I did it. It's good. Take the vaccines. But you got, no, it's okay. That's all right. You got your freedoms. But I happen to take the vaccine. If it doesn't work, you'll be the first to know, okay? I'll call up Alabama. I'll say, hey, you know what? But it is working. But you do have your freedoms. You have to maintain that. You have to maintain that. And you got to get your kids back to school.
He has such a hard time threading that needle. I love as powerful and influential as he is and how much control he has. He's always trying to test the message. And when he sees the reaction, by the way, just like a stand-up comic, I so have always identified with his live performances because he really gets a feel, and I'm not being sarcastic, he really gets a feel for the energy and mood of the audience. He tries to play to them, and when they push back on him, he pulls back, he moves on to another bit that works. I won't play anything more from Alabama, but you're guaranteed to see a spike, even though you think at least they're outside. So many of them are not vaccinated, of course, and they're really right on top of each other, and for long periods of time. So it just seems bad. And the statistics regarding the 2-week, or rather the Sturgis motorcycle rally in South Dakota, just on cue, as predicted, South Dakota sees the country's largest 2-week COVID surge with a 230% increase in cases in the wake of the Sturgis motorcycle rally, as predicted by the experts. And finally on COVID, well, not finally, two more at least headlines. A very well-known, influential radio host named Phil Valentine, a conservative radio host, died at age 61 following a month-long battle with COVID-19. Just listen to this CNN report. Phil Valentine, a Nashville, Tennessee-based conservative radio talk show host, had questioned whether it was necessary for all people to get COVID-19 vaccines, died on Saturday, according to his employer, WWTN Radio, announced on Twitter. He was 61 years old. Please keep the Valentine family in your thoughts and prayers, the station said in a tweet. His death comes more than a month after the host first announced he'd been diagnosed with COVID-19. On his program, Phil Valentine had repeatedly downplayed the importance of getting a vaccine against the virus, saying last December that he believed, this is just last December, that he believed his personal odds of dying from COVID-19 were probably way less than 1%. But his message changed in late July when his family announced that Valentine had been hospitalized in, quote, very serious condition, was suffering from COVID, pneumonia, and the attendant side effects. Phil would like his listeners to know that while he was never been an anti-vaxxer, he regrets not being more vehemently pro-vaccine and looks forward to being more vigorously advocate that position as soon as he's back on the air, which we all hope is soon, according to his brother, back in mid-July. Well, now he's dead, and that's horrible. And you just have to wonder how many people his opinion had an influence on. And I feel like I am hearing these stories almost every day, that people who are influencers, they're public personas on radios and podcasts and YouTubers, etc., they are advocating against the vaccine, and then they themselves are getting very sick or even dying. I feel like I read it all the time. It's just a horrible set of circumstances and consequences. At what point will we see a change in that? I just don't know. And it's hard to believe how crazy the news and headlines get. But the FDA on Twitter tweeted, "You are not a horse. You are not a cow. Seriously, y'all, stop it." In reference to a horrific nightmare that is unplaying, specifically in Mississippi, where 37% of the population only is fully vaccinated, where they are ingesting a livestock drug, a drug used for livestock supply centers. People are taking it. Apparently, Fox News and other media outlets have promoted its potential positive effects on COVID. It's an anti-parasitic drug commonly used for livestock. It should not be taken to treat or prevent COVID-19, according to the FDA. Here is one of the more insane questions you'd ever heard asked by an anchor to a surgeon general. This is Brianna Keeler hosting State of the Union on CNN with Surgeon General Vivek Murthy.
Health officials in Mississippi say that poison control center calls are climbing because what they're seeing are residents taking something called ivermectin, which is an anti-parasite drug for horses and cows to treat coronavirus. This has even led to one hospitalization. Can you be clear for the American people on this drug?
Well, Brianna, that is heartbreaking to hear. And let me just say very clearly that ivermectin is not a recommended treatment for COVID-19. It is not a recommended drug to prevent COVID-19. The best protection we have against COVID-19 is the vaccine. And if you get COVID-19, we actually do have treatments that work, from steroids to monoclonal antibodies and other treatments. But ivermectin is not one of them. And Brianna, what this highlights is just the profound cost of health misinformation right now. We've been seeing health misinformation as a problem for years, but the speed, scale, and sophistication with which it is spreading and impacting our health is really unprecedented. And it's happening largely in part aided and abetted by social media platforms. This is why a few weeks ago I put out a Surgeon General's advisory on health misinformation, in part calling companies to account to say they have to step up and take more responsibility for this health misinformation on their sites.
And all right, that's the Surgeon General Vivek Murthy. Crazy that has to be addressed. And now I want to play for you Sean Penn, the actor Sean Penn. He's an activist, and he has an organization helping citizens get vaccinated, also assisting Haiti with relief efforts after yet another earthquake. You can go support him at correspondent.org. Here he is on CNN with my doppelganger, Michael Smercon.
Some folks needed to be vaccinated, but not the entire production. And you said what? Explain that to me. So for Gaslit, the production, you made a lot of headlines because, and help me understand this, I guess some folks needed to be vaccinated, but not the entire production. And you said what? Explain that to us.
So they have what's called Zone 1. And Zone 1 is anybody that works close to actors. So actors are protected. But if a stagehand is working alongside a stagehand who is not protected, then they can get sick. I didn't want to feel complicit in something that was just taking care of one group and not the other. And I do believe that everyone should get vaccinated. I believe it should be mandatory, like turning your headlights on in a car at night. But obviously that's not going to happen tomorrow. And yet, at least it can happen in some areas. And businesses, a lot of businesses are starting to take the lead on that. So I'll go back to Gaslit. I'll go back when I can be assured that the 100% of the crew has gotten vaccinated.
Sean Penn on CNN talking about the standard that he is trying to uphold when in the productions he's working on. And now let's listen to Dr. Kavita Patel on MSNBC's Velshi talking about the effectiveness of vaccines in schools.
All I have to do for all the people who want to dispute the reality of how masks can protect, we actually kept schools open last year. There were not all of them, obviously, But of the schools that were open, we've been able to study them. There have been definitive studies that have accumulated data from the United States and around the world. And one of the single driving factors, in addition to ventilation and spacing, are masks. And there's no question in my mind that we could prevent so many of the infections we're seeing. And it's amazing to me still that we've got Secretary of Education has to get on the phone and help back up superintendents who know they want to do the right thing. And I think Emily's point also, just something I want to illustrate about how we're watching this virus spread that isn't really obvious. What we're seeing are parents who are allowing their children not to go to school with masks, and then they're bullying Emily's children. These are also the same families who are likely the least to be vaccinated, likely the least to engage in protection themselves as adults. Now you really understand why we think of this as viral spread of misinformation as well. And I'm just disturbed that this is a vulnerable population. Even if we only have 2% of pediatric cases being hospitalized, which is about the rate, and that's quote unquote better than adults, why should we accept anyone gets sick? Why should we accept that anyone is hospitalized when it could be preventable?
Yeah, well said. And I really liked her. I'm going to maybe try to get her on the program. Velshi on MSNBC. Now, here is the Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona. He was on Meet the Press on NBC. He says schools and states with anti-mask mandate rules can't be denied federal funds.
You've said that these federal funds that have already been made available can be used to do this. How does a Broward County, Florida, or an Alachua County, Florida, go about getting that money if their own governor, usually the liaison between the states and the feds, is standing in the way? Can they actually access this money?
Yeah, so thank you for having me. And first and foremost, across the country we have children returning to school, and we're excited about that, but we have to do everything in our power to keep them safe. I spoke to the superintendents of those two communities, and I let them know that we have their back. And yes, they can draw down on the funds that were promised to them so they can safely reopen schools.
Right, but how do they get that money? I mean, you guys get, I mean, because right. It's one thing to say you're going to do it, but again, if the state legislature and the state executive are not doing it, don't they control the purse strings here?
Not really. This was approved by Congress, so they do have access to federal funds that they can draw down at any moment to make sure that schools are opening safely and that our students and staff have the confidence of returning to in-person learning. They do not have to get the green light from the governor to use these funds. They're made available to them, and I called these superintendents personally to let them know that.
Well, there you go. Miguel Cardona explaining it to Chuck Todd, who had an awful panel on things Afghanistan, if you ask me. But let's now pivot to that. Here's the president talking about the achievements in terms of getting people out over the past few days.
Altogether, we lifted approximately 11,000 people out of Kabul in less than 36 hours. It's an incredible operation. Let me be clear. The evacuation of thousands of people from Kabul is going to be hard and painful, no matter when it started, when we began. It would have been true if we had started a month ago or a month from now. There is no way to evacuate this many people without pain and loss of heartbreaking images you see on television. It's just a fact. My heart aches for those people you see. We are proving that we can move those thousands of people a day out of Kabul. We're bringing our citizens, NATO allies, Afghanis who in fact has helped us in the war effort. But we have a long way to go, and a lot could still go wrong. But to move out 30,000 people in just over a week, that's a great testament to the men and women on the ground in Kabul and our armed services.
Well, Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger and other folks have criticized the Biden administration for the pullout. But and here's one clip from State of the Union on Sunday with Kinzinger putting some other details into perspective.
You're seeing members of your party, some of whom you mentioned there, President Trump, certainly others, Mike Pompeo, Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, and they've criticized the Biden administration despite contributing to this SIV backlog. What's your reaction to them rewriting history?
It's amazing. I think what breaks my heart probably more than anything on a political side is that America is being splayed out in the world and embarrassed by the world, and our European allies are saying America looks weak. And yet, honestly, the Republicans are putting out talking points to make Biden look bad. The Democrats are putting out talking points to point at the past administration. Truth, they're both responsible. And we're so tribalistic as a country, it's hard for somebody to imagine a Republican saying everybody's responsible. But let's keep in mind, Mike Pompeo met with the Taliban as Donald Trump was publicly saying, we have to get out of Afghanistan at all costs. It's not worth it. Mike Pompeo meets with the Taliban and tries to negotiate something. By the way, they ended up getting rolled harder than almost as bad as Neville Chamberlain, because they knew what the desired outcome of the Trump administration was. So they set this up to fail. But always, of course, Joe Biden could have easily turned this around and instead used it as the excuse to get out. Both parties have failed the American people, and it can't continue, and it particularly can't continue with just pointing fingers while America's embarrassed in front of the world.
Oh, I don't know about all that, but let's move on to one more. Here is Fox News' Chris Wallace pressing the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, over President Joe Biden's, quote, flat wrong statements about Afghanistan.
In addition to the question of the security and the ease of Americans getting to the airport, the president on Friday said a few other things that were flat wrong, Mr. Secretary. Here he is on the threat from al-Qaeda.
What interest do we have in Afghanistan at this point with al-Qaeda gone?
But a UN report this summer says that al-Qaeda is present in 15 of the 34 provinces of Afghanistan. And General Milley said this summer that if the Taliban fell, that he was, or rather took over Kabul, that he was going to have to upgrade the terror threat from al-Qaeda. What the president said just wasn't true.
Chris, step back for 1 second. First, as we all know, we went to Afghanistan 20 years ago with one mission and one purpose in mind, and that was to deal with the folks who attacked us on 9/11, to bring bin Laden to justice, which we did a decade ago, and to diminish the capacity of al-Qaeda to do the same thing again, to attack us from Afghanistan. And that, to the president's point, has been successful. We got bin Laden a decade ago.
But Mr. Secretary, the president
Please.
said al-Qaeda is gone. Simple question: is al-Qaeda gone from Afghanistan?
Al-Qaeda's capacity to do what it did on 9/11, to attack us, to attack our partners or allies from Afghanistan, is vastly, vastly diminished.
Is it gone?
Are there al-Qaeda members and remnants in Afghanistan? Yes, but what the president was referring to was its capacity to do what it did on 9/11, and that capacity has been very successfully diminished.
But are they gone? You know, it's actually a dumb question. It has never mattered, as I've said over and over. All they need is an internet connection. That's all they need, an internet connection. They don't need a country. They don't need training camps. And I have a hard time seeing it any other way. I'm going to talk to Clint Watts about that issue this week as well. But nonetheless, you know, Biden shouldn't have said they're gone. And what's Secretary Blinken supposed to say there? There could be al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. There could be al-Qaeda in fucking Toledo. What we should be worried about is Yal-Qaeda. And that is the American far-right extremists that are doing crazy shit every single day. All right, so that's all I've got for you in terms of audio clips. There's so much more to discuss on Afghanistan. I've got a great conversation coming up with James Fallows, who's a really good person to talk to about the comparisons between Vietnam and Afghanistan, which he unwinds for us really well. He is one of the greatest journalists of our generation. Maura Quint joins me every Monday. She is a writer and an activist. That's coming up as well. But before that, let's do a news dump. Everything else. Well, I gave Pete Coe, who's completely unpaid, the day off from the opening and the jingle. So let's dig into the archives. This one inspired by a longtime listener, Karen Madison.
Hungry piranhas swarm, form a great big clump. They're feasting on your flesh for today's news dump.
That didn't sound that bad. It sounded like a child gurgling a little bit of water right there. All right, let me start with a headline from McDonald's, who are announced they'd be adding a new menu item, a glazed donut, and apparently They looked at the diabetes epidemic in the United States of America, and they said, you know what, this is just not bad enough. Let's deliver a sweet glazed donut that tears apart to make it shareable, and let's make it apple fritter and blueberry and cinnamon roll, and let's also make it available all day. Thanks, McDonald's. That's fantastic. That's going to be just another item of yours that proves irresistible, especially while I'm on the road late at night and nothing else is open. Don't judge me. Okay, sorry. Let's move on to another headline I wanted to share with you here in the news dump, and that is that a giant asteroid apparently buzzed the Earth yesterday. That's right, a potentially hazardous asteroid zipped past Earth at a very high rate of speed, the 58,000 miles an hour. How about that? Hard to imagine that fast. It's apparently traveling about 16 miles every second. NASA estimated the asteroid is about 4,800 feet wide, approximately 4 times as wide as the Empire State Building is tall. But it missed us. So there, middle finger to that asteroid. And while you're doing it, another one hits you in the face, because life is a cartoon. Speaking of space, SpaceX now has announced that they think they can send humans to the moon sooner than 2024. Well, as I have been suggesting, I hope they fly a black woman astronaut to the moon, and I hope she plants an American flag in the moon and then takes a knee and waves to the camera. That's a little dream of mine that I hope goes viral. And here's some news coming out of Russia. The president, the evil empire, is Vladimir Putin. It's not an evil empire. He's evil. There's a lot of good people in Russia. Sorry. He says he's not allowing Afghan refugees into Russia. He says his country won't accept Afghan refugees because he doesn't want to deal with militants masquerading as asylum seekers. No surprise there from Russia and specifically Vladimir Putin. Jesse Jackson and his wife are under observation. Apparently they've contracted COVID, so best wishes to them. Rachel Maddow has decided to officially stay at MSNBC. They must have unloaded a crate filled of gold, because if she went out on her own, she could make that, but they probably made her many offers that she can't refuse. So that's good news for MSNBC and their continued profit making on her name and hard work of those on her staff. So I don't know how you feel about that show, but good luck. All right, that is all I've got for you on today's news dump. I hope that you are doing okay, hanging in there. Check in with me if you aren't. Always love to hear from listeners, regardless of what it's about. standuppwithpete@gmail.com. Send me your vitamin N, your nature shots. I'm short on those. I share them with subscribers every day, along with the show notes and the show for you to listen to. It comes in your email box if you sign up to become a subscriber. All right, I'm not going to do any ads today. I'm out of time. I don't do them every single day, a few a week, but I'm going to just get now to the show. How about that? Let's get to the interviews. We're starting with the great James Fallows. Maura Quint is coming up. Awesome conversation with her, but I wanted to share my interview with James Fallows. Sat down with him, I think it was Thursday of last week. He is the winner of all the awards that you can win in journalism. He's been a long-time contributing writer to The Atlantic, written for the magazine since the late 70s. He's reported from outside the U.S. and China on aviation. He worked as President Jimmy Carter's chief speechwriter for a period of time. And he and his wife, the great Deborah Fallows, are the authors of the 2018 book, Our Towns, a 100,000-mile journey into the heart of America, now a national bestseller, and the basis for an HBO documentary that came out in April as well. I wanted to talk with Mr. Fallows about anything, frankly, but specifically Afghanistan. He's always so good to me. He's great on Twitter. I highly recommend you follow him on Twitter. And thank him for joining me on the show. Here we go right now with the legend. Are you still running?
I am.
Awesome.
Not today, but often.
Oh, it's so great to hear. That's awesome. I worry that I'll at some point not be able to run anymore. I mean, it's, my wife's even worse about it. If she can't run, forget about it.
So you can tell her that. So I've been running now for 60 years almost, and knock wood, never any knee problems, never any feet problems, just Achilles tendon from time to time.
Do you attribute that to your style or just your genetics? Or
I think just luck. My brother has had 2 hip replacements and knee replacements, so it's just luck.
All right, I've just told you all about the legend, and I'm very excited that I am in conversation, or about to be, with the great James Fallows. Welcome back. It's great to see you and have you on. Thank you, sir.
So the great Pete, I'm really glad to talk with you again, this time virtually, but we've met many times in person, so glad to see you across the airwaves.
Yes, sir. There's so much to discuss with you, but I do want to start with kind of something that certainly is relevant and a lot of people are talking about, but you have maybe a little bit more intimate knowledge or closeness to. And I just wanted to get this, your take on the comparisons between the drawdown and the bug out of Afghanistan and that in 1975 in Saigon, Vietnam. What do you make of those comparisons? What's the truth?
Yes, and I think that the fact that people can liken these two events is an indicator of how few of today's Americans were actually around when the evacuation of Saigon was going on in 1975. I'd just gotten out of graduate school then. I was actually living in Texas, where my wife, Deb, whom you know, was starting her graduate school time. And the protracted nightmare of the Vietnam decade plus for the U.S. was on a scale that is just different from the nightmare that's happening in Afghanistan. Afghanistan was, from my point of view, a tragic mistake for the U.S., an ongoing tragedy for people of Afghanistan. But the idea that the scenes we're seeing now from Kabul, terrible as they are, and heartbreaking as they are, and morally staining as they are, that they are comparable to what happened in Vietnam just is not, they're not on the same plane. Would you like me to go on?
I would like you to explain me by what metrics they are not the same.
So one metric would be simply the U.S. engagement. Over this decade, the dozen years, let's say, of direct U.S. combat experience in Vietnam, there were, simply counting Americans, about 58,000 casualties. There have been 2,000, let's say under 3,000 U.S. casualties in Afghanistan. American casualties are, of course, not the only measure of tragedy, heartbreak, and everything else, but that is one indication of the scale. This is 20 plus times as great a physical toll on people in the U.S. The toll of people in country, as they said in Vietnam, and presumably now too, also is on a different scale. I don't know how many people in Afghanistan and its environs have been killed in addition to those Americans and Allied troops who have been killed, but it cannot be comparable to what happened in Southeast Asia in those days when there were probably millions. I say that deliberately, millions of people from North and South Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia who were killed, displaced, permanently injured, etc., during that dozen years of war and the preceding decade plus by the French, of course, lest we forget, and the literal fall of the capital city. Whatever has happened in Kabul in the last week or so and the weeks to come, what went on in South Vietnam for a matter of months. Again, they're on a different scale. There was an actual battle for the city of Saigon. It was part of a long, drawn-out end-stage battle between the Viet Cong, the North Vietnamese Army, the South Vietnamese Army, the Americans, the Australians, and other allies the U.S. had. And there was fighting until the very last minute and for a long time after that last minute. I'll just say one other thing. I would, again, if there is even a single person who was guaranteed safety by the U.S. and who's still stranded in Afghanistan, and I'm sure there are lots. Any one of those is a tragedy and a moral burden for the U.S. that we should do everything to correct. But there would be hundreds of thousands and more of those people in Vietnam, and children left behind by mainly American fathers, whom Deb and I saw over the decades, starting in the 1980s when we were traveling through Vietnam. So what is happening in Afghanistan is terrible. What happened in Vietnam was just a different scale of terribleness, and our imagination should encompass both of these kinds of events.
Is there any disagreement that you've seen from those who understand and were around then? Is anybody that understands and has much less studied that 75, the end of the Vietnam War, the U.S. pullout, and is making the argument that there are, really direct similarities or that this is worse or something? It also, by the way, James, one thing that is different is that everybody has a camera now. Imagine if there were a camera in every pocket in Saigon in 1975. The images that we would see would be pretty, I'm sure, much uglier.
Exactly. And there are. I mean, that's an excellent point, because there were these couple of moments of still photographs or film footage from the years in Vietnam, which were iconic precisely because people weren't witnessing it all. Right. There is the famous photo of the South Vietnamese Army official murdering a man in the head on a street in Saigon. There's a little girl running down the street with her back aflame from napalm. There is the helicopter getting people out of Saigon, not the U.S. Embassy, but an office building, which, again, I've seen that place with my own eyes about 10 years after that occurred. And so those things had such power because there weren't, millions of videos. The terrible, horrific, heartbreaking scenes of what has been happening in Kabul are terrible and heartbreaking and horrific. But if there had been as many cameras all those years ago, 45 years ago, whenever it was, I think there would have been even more on display of this horror.
What would you want to say about whether it be a comparison to Vietnam, Iraq, or any other long military conflict that we've been involved with in terms of the, I guess, not only the refugee crisis that it creates, but the issue of interpreters and those who fought alongside American forces being resettled either here or somewhere else? Is it worth comparing to Vietnam, or, just talking exclusively about what's happening right now in Afghanistan?
So I think there are comparisons, and the comparison is mainly the moral burden. And as somebody who has been, as you know, as we've discussed, I am a big non-interventionist in general. I do think that when the U.S. Goes to war other places and takes people into our trust, we have a moral burden to them. So I think the U.S. does have, I agree with those who say the U.S. has a moral burden. I also believe, as a parallel but separate point, in contrast to many Republicans who are talking about those left behind now, I think that the more refugees, the better from the U.S. point of view. That in general, refugees have been a positive influence for the U.S. economically, socially, culturally, and we can talk later if you want. I spent most of the year of 1980 traveling around the U.S. for the Atlantic, looking at Vietnamese and Indochinese refugees who had resettled in Arkansas, Louisiana, in Fresno, in Florida, and other places, and telling some of their stories. So I think that we do have a duty to them. That's one reason to be very, very careful when going to war, that you take on moral responsibilities to veterans and their families and their children, and but also to the people we dislocate. So, yes, there is a moral comparison. There is not a scale comparison, and people who've suggested there is, as they say, do not know what they are talking about.
Well, I guess my one question about, your research and journalism at that time would be how many of those Vietnamese resettled and became Americans, attacked us from within, became terrorists and attacked ordinary Americans or whatever?
That is a good question, and the fact that I don't have an answer suggests that it hasn't come up. And the people who I was seeing in 1979, 1980 for reporting were mainly fisher people in Louisiana. Right. They were running the nail salon business in Southern California. The Cambodians became donut people. I don't know, there was a time in the 80s and 90s when most Winchell's donut shops and other donut shops are run by Cambodians. I mean, it just is, you can look it up. Huh. And so I'm not aware of a big terrorist presence from
donuts. They did donuts and nails. That sounds like a very good contribution to the American social fabric and economy. Well, what about these Afghans that are coming? You're already hearing, the usual suspects tearing their hair out, terrifying us. I mean, the Afghan people and culture, they're amazing. If you've met one, you've met, probably a few. They're amazing people. And it's just sad to hear this, but you expect it at this point.
And a great, as you know, a constant in American history is that whoever is already in our country, from not counting the native inhabitants, but sort of all the other people who have arrived after that, they think that whoever is coming after them is suspect, whether it's Germans in the 1850s or Irish or Italians or the Vietnamese, 45 years ago, who are economically much more successful than native-born white Americans now. in terms of economics and academics and all the rest. So it is in our nature to be suspect of the last people trying to come up the ladder. But I am in favor of the people coming up the ladder.
Back in 2000, let's see, what's the date on the tragedy of the American military? 15?
I think so, yeah.
Probably one of the most important articles I've ever, I learned more from reading this long form piece. I hope it won awards. It should have, that you wrote in 2015 than anything I'd ever read. How does, I kind of wanted to take that. Didn't get a chance to reread it, but take it and reapply it to your analysis of specifically, again, what went wrong. Yeah, I mean, in Afghanistan, and if you want, to a larger extent to Iraq. I interviewed Spencer Ackerman today about his book, Reign of Terror, how the 9/11 era destabilized America and produced Trump. But specifically in the American military, what went wrong? Every general said it was going great, and we're training up more forces, and everything seems to be, progressing at least.
So thanks for remembering that article, which I think we may have talked about back at the time.
For sure.
Your previous shows. And so for members of the audience who might not have this in front of them right now, the essential argument of it was, I distill this way, that the U.S. in its current chicken hawk era is willing to do anything for its military except take it seriously. Mm-hmm. And by anything, I mean, salute to the heroes at football games and thank you for your service and all these other lip service type things, as opposed to thinking carefully about where force is committed, how we back it up and not, and holding the military actually accountable for the machinery it buys, the money it spends, and the decision it makes. And I think I quote in I quote in that article now 6 years ago, somebody pointing out that after previous wars, let's say running through Korea, at times when the U.S. was sort of mainly through the draft army of the World War II era through Vietnam and other ways, it was sort of, there was a willed or unwilled connection between the military and most part of American life. So people were familiar with the military, they could make fun of it, and they didn't think they had to treat generals as these reverent, godlike figures. Yeah. And so after all previous military engagements, there was after-action accounting. Why did things go wrong, in this or that stage of World War II or in Korea or in other places? And there's been essentially no reckoning with the last 20 years of warfare in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and we've had general after general plead for another 6 months, we'll do it. And so I think that the argument I was making back about the chicken hawk era, when America's always at war, but no Americans are at war. Only 1% of the public has served at any time in the last 20 years. I think that is the dilemma we're in now. One other thing, the fact that Joe Biden both has lived through a lot of this and has had a son who was in uniform and not in combat, but in combat theaters, I think is a plus for his saying, okay, I've been involved.
What, you I think we're tweeting about Joe Biden's announcement the other day. What was he was very powerful and I think you call it blunt, a lot of blunt statements. And this is, I think, interesting because if you know his history on this conflict, he advised, and he always, I guess he's the last apparently person in the room with President Obama, and he advised Obama not to surge in 2009, which I still think, and who cares what I think, but that was the worst mistake of his administration, certainly foreign policy wise. That surge in 2009 that I think lasted 3 more years, like 30,000 more troops. I know a Gold Star widow who lost her husband. She's a Marine herself, actually. Derek Wyatt, her wife, his widow, Kate, is a good friend of mine. I mean, he was as a result. So was John Kelly's son, the former chief of staff of Donald Trump, and many others who lost lives and whose promises to their families were broken. So, what about Biden on the record on Afghanistan and that speech?
I agree with all the sort of setup premises you have. I do think that was Obama's worst foreign policy mistake as president. I think he was set up for it for 2 reasons. One is he had been one of the few Democratic officials to be bravely on record against the Iraq war before it happened. And so part of his logic then is Afghanistan's where we should be concentrating. So he felt as if Afghanistan was his war also. As a brand new president with no military experience, he was sort of a sucker I would say, or he was suckered by the generals saying, okay, just give us a little more time. To his credit, a year later, he said, okay, we gave this a try. It didn't work out, and there were many casualties. Biden did support the Iraq War. And I think Biden has said that he was wrong to do that. But he was, at the time of 2009, he was, as you point out, on the record saying, this is the wrong investment. It's never going to pay off. In his speech, he sort of subtweeted Obama, pointing out that Biden himself had always been against this. And I'll say two other things about the speech. First, it is possible that Biden was even sort of gratuitously blunt about Afghanistan's own military in that speech, because 5 or 6 times he said, we're not going to send our troops there if they're not going to fight for themselves. And he made that point maybe one time too often. But the bluntness, and again, I speak, as you know, as a former White House speechwriter, the bluntness in general was different from anything I've heard from any other president. And it's I was not around to hear Harry Truman give speeches, but it's the way I imagine Harry Truman would have given a speech, including Truman's famous line, "The buck stops here, the buck stops with me."
But yeah, I never I want every leader to say that, but I don't love it because who shouldn't they, as you mentioned earlier, and you were tweeting about this too, in terms of the historical, the during the Carter administration where you were the chief speechwriter, and there was obviously an internal debate about whether or not we should send troops into Iran, and of course the helicopter crash. Nobody knows what happened. Well, somebody resigned over that. Shouldn't somebody resign over the information that was given to the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, or the President of the United States, and that they went out and made those comments that they made and then were forced to answer to like 4 days later when Jake Tapper asked them or whatever?
Yes, I agree. And I think we will figure out who should be taking accountability for what. And I do hope the administration, the Congress does that. Here's an interesting historical note about Cyrus Vance, who was Jimmy Carter's Secretary of State, who has resigned after the failed Iranian hostage mission. What's fascinating is that Vance opposed launching this mission at all because he thought it would escalate things or whatever. And when Carter decided to launch it, Vance told him, whether this succeeds or fails, you have my resignation. So to his moral strength, I think Vance waited to announce it until after, that this all was public. But he said, I don't know whether this will be a success or a failure, but I oppose it on principle, and so I will resign. And I think that is something that's different from what we hear from public figures these days.
He also was very prescient when he was quoted as saying, and someday my son will be the Manhattan DA and prosecute former President Donald Trump. And everyone's like, what? Fred Trump's kid?
Life is strange, I think, is the moral we take from this.
Exactly. So, what do you, I wanted to just ask you one question about what you think about kind of what has changed, in 20 years. And when it comes to national security, between the intelligence community and their internal battles and maybe never really, you've written and talked a lot about accountability for the Trump administration. But, let's go further. How about accountability for the Bush administration? There was never any of that specifically to the architects of torture. Although Gina Haspel was a torture leader in that technique, and she's, led the CIA. So what about the intelligence community, much less, DOD culture, and them ever being on the same team to achieve a national security objective? Didn't even mention the FBI. All these people.
I do actually know a lot of these people, and by small world principles, for a long time, our literal next door neighbor in Washington, D.C. has been William Webster, the only person to be in charge of both the CIA and the FBI, still going strong in his late 90s, and who is somebody who is of what you would think of as the antique, principled conservatives and national security people. He served in World War II. He served in the Korean War. He was a district judge. He was not nonpartisan. So he's talked about these sorts of ethical issues. I do believe, and as we've discussed, there is a now 20-year chain of should be accountability from the George W. Bush administration and Dick Cheney and Paul Wolfowitz and their team for the consequences we're seeing right now. I think that if there had been a limited punitive response after 9/11 to the al-Qaeda camps and try to blow them up, as the U.S. was entitled to do after 9/11 20 years ago, and not going into Iraq, not staying in Afghanistan forever, our history would be different. And I think any reckoning of what's happened in the last 2 weeks needs to involve the last 2 decades.
The two things that most infuriated me about the, quote, war on terror was that the American leadership, including a lot of liberals, didn't take seriously the most important question, which was, why were we attacked? And bin Laden actually made a whole bunch of tapes explaining exactly why, but we just ignored them and said it was because of our freedoms and that they're evil, which does nothing for anybody other than make them not have to worry about it and not have to think about it and go back to the mall. But the other thing that always infuriates me is that we were told by, and I think I heard Obama say this at one point, and I remember just being so triggered and upset by it, like, not you too. We were told we have to prevent al-Qaeda from ever, reorganizing and replanning terrorist attacks from anywhere. And that's idiotic, because you and I could plan anything we want, from a potluck to a terrorist attack, right now, because we both have these crazy things called internet connections. You know a lot about technology. I think those two, I'd love for you to take those two, not taking seriously bin Laden and then telling the other lie that we needed to, go to Afghanistan because we didn't want them to have a place. Who needs a place? I have a shed.
Exactly. And there were, back 20 years ago, there were some tactical advantages to bin Laden and his people in being in those caves. But as you point out, in the 20 years since then, we've seen lots of indications of lots of people planning terror virtually from all over the world. Let me tell you the riskiest editorial call that my friend and former editor of The Atlantic, James Bennett, made during his 10 years as editor. Yeah. He published by me a cover story in 2006, 5 years after 9/11, saying, declaring victory, declaring the war on terror in its all-distorting mode over, and that the United States needed to return to some kind of normal life, as opposed to being in this permanent fear economy, permanent war economy. And James put that on the cover, knowing that if there were, in the month between when that went to press and when it came out, some new attack, they'd say, oh, look at the Atlantic. But I think his call stands up, and you know him, of course, from our
I like Jim. I like Jim a lot. He's always really nice to me. Yep.
Yes. And so, anyhow, I agree with you. And just thinking that international terror and disruption is a place-based phenomenon is not a wise view.
Can I just have you for a few more minutes?
I always enjoy talking with you, Mr. Dominic.
Why are you writing about Rome so much? It's making me feel unsafe, uneasy, and insecure.
What I love about the Roman Empire is that even before the U.S. was a country, Americans were nervously looking at Rome. And so you can see from some of the founders' rhetoric, they're saying back and forth, what happened to the Roman Republic? You can see in the bookshelves of people in the mid 1700s, all these books about what happened to the Roman Empire. And so it's a never-ending source of fascination. It went on for a very long time, but also it didn't go on forever. My good friend Cullen Murphy, who you may know from The Atlantic and from other gatherings, wrote a wonderful book about a dozen years ago called Are We Rome?, looking systematically at ways in which the U.S. is similar and different, and it was very useful. My friend Eric Schnurrer, who I've been quoting many times, has been sort of a classical, he knows about this. And I did a piece about 2 years ago in The Atlantic, essentially saying the fall of the Roman Empire wasn't that bad. What happens if imperial power crumbles? Trying to do a thought experiment of the bright side of falling apart.
I wanted to just get you to talk a little bit about your thoughts on COVID and the pandemic. And I know that we could talk about this. I can talk with you. I could ask you questions for 15 hours, and I can't wait to do it again. But what do you think's kind of, one or two important points to make about how this country has dealt with this pandemic, this country?
So I think the U.S., as is often the case, has been a spectacular success and a spectacular failure. The failure is the fact, and I did a piece about a year ago in the Atlantic arguing this, that probably 2/3 at least of the casualties in the United States are entirely preventable. I'm talking about before the vaccine. Just, if the U.S. had been alert to what was happening in China, et cetera. So there was the spectacular failure of preparation a year ago. There is the spectacular failure of public information right now of people who are not taking the miracle cure. The spectacular success is that we have a miracle cure. Yeah. And I am old enough to have gotten original polio shots when they came out, smallpox vaccines, all these other things. And so the fact that there was a cure is remarkable and will be studied. The fact that we're hitting some kind of obstacle is depressing, and that is I don't. What is your take-home lesson from our current travails?
I think are you asking me a question?
I'm asking you. I'm asking you an actual question.
I want to write something, and I don't know how to write, so maybe you should write it. But I want to write a thing about what I was brought up to believe as an American in terms of the history of our country overcoming obstacles, challenges, whether it be a natural disaster, a tornado, a hurricane, or a war. And when we came together and how we come together and the sacrifices that people make. And the history of the country is that people make a lot of sacrifices. They volunteer their time, their money, their lives. They give their lives. They sacrifice their children. They work for free. Like remember healthcare.gov, crash, and a whole bunch of nerds came together and stayed overnight, and they got it up, and that was such a huge achievement. They worked together. Now what we're asking Americans to do to join the fight, Mr. Fallows, is here's what we're asking. We're asking that you get a shot. And so, you know what? But as a matter of fact, we'll make it easier. We'll actually bring it to you. How much does it cost? Oh, it's free. You know what? Actually, I'll come to your house. Is the door open? You don't even have to get up. And if you let me give the shot, you have joined the fight. You've done everything you possibly could by just sitting there and getting an inoculation. And a huge percentage of Americans don't want to join that fight. And I think it's because they have been misinformed purposely, mostly purposely, not because they're afraid to join the fight, because they're actually afraid.
I agree with your whole summary of this. And I think one of the worst things in the U.S. now, apart from the things that have always been bad, our racial divide, economic extremes, et cetera, is the conversion of more and more of life into just political warfare, national political warfare. There was no good reason why getting a shot should have become a partisan warfare issue. The shot was developed under Donald Trump. It could have been the Trump vaccine. I would have happily have taken the Trump vaccine. I would have, they could have done that. And somehow how this became perverted into the latest frontier in partisan warfare is a real tragedy. And I hope something, whether it's casualty rates or whatever, will steer people out of it, or just
I also
it is
think
horrific.
What makes America great, not that we're good at lockdowns or that we're good at masking. We haven't did very good at that. But that the smartest scientists in the world developed a miracle vaccine in record amount of time. That deserves a USA chant, and that deserves a we're the best, and that's an American exceptionalism, and all this bullshit that you're told all the time, which is usually just patriotic porn. No, we actually got a whole bunch of vaccines done, and now Australia is screwed up.
And the Chinese vaccine is not working very well.
Yes,
so
we did it,
and so
we did it, and you don't want it.
So there'll be Nobel prizes for this. Yep. As soon as they can go through all the Nobel process, and so yes, this should be a matter of transpartisan national pride and sharing this bounty with the world, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know why this is the case. I'll just say one other thing. So one of my sons and his family live in Texas. So I have two grandchildren in Texas public schools whose governor is now diagnosed with COVID. And the kids have to go to public school in Texas, where it's a battle between their school district in Dallas and the state to keep these children safe, which is just insane.
having you on the record for all these challenges that we're going through is so important because of your respect and understanding of history, specifically how America has reacted, but how the rest of the world has as well. You are a national treasure. I really appreciate you joining me, and I'll do whatever you tell me. If you tell me to jump off the cliff, I'm jumping. You or your wife. You just give me orders and I'll do them.
With great power comes great responsibility. So I'll tell you mainly just to keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Pete.
Such a big deal to me. He is such a big deal to me. Just go read his body of work, read his reporting, read that magazine article I mentioned we talked about with the military, and his books and his documentary. It's such important work that he and his wife, Deborah, have done recently. So check him out. Let him know. Please let him know that you heard him on the show so he knows we've got a lot of folks listening that are active and that are engaged. And thank him, as always, for joining me. I appreciate all those tweets. All those mentions matter a lot. Okay, well, now it's time to get to Maura Mondays, everybody. Maura Quint is a good friend of mine who I still literally have never met in person, but we've become really good friends over the pandemic. She's joined me on the show, and I should say over the period of the podcast, many times, and now pretty much every Monday I get her on. She is a great writer, and you've seen her work in everywhere from The New Yorker to The Onion and so much more. She's also an activist. She's the executive director of Tax March, which I've talked with her about several times here, of course, on the podcast. And we caught up to recap last week, talk a little bit about this week and everything that's happening in our lives. Always a great conversation with Maura Quint. You can follow her on Twitter at Behind Your Back. She loves your tweets. She always says we have such a great audience, so please never stop letting her know what you liked, what you heard, and weigh in on any of it on Twitter at Behind Your Back. All the links to Maura, to James, everybody else in the show notes for every day's podcast. Here we go. Maura Mondays. Hi, Maura. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you so much for letting me join you. I feel privileged to be allowed to be in this space.
You could have been doing so many other things, though, with the time you're spending talking to me, such as?
Yeah, I can't think of a single one. I could have been asleep, actually. That sounds so fucking fantastic. Oh, my God, I could have been asleep.
Are you a good sleeper?
I'm a terrible sleeper. I don't sleep well. Oh. And I have not slept in a week, basically. So if I start talking about like purple elephants or something, or, you know.
Why, what are your sleep issues? I love to talk about sleep issues, but I feel bad because I don't have them, but I'm sure I will.
Because you're perfect. Because you just go to bed every night.
Yes, but I feel like for me with anxiety and depression that I experienced through circumstantial things like losing my job, like sleep was my escape for that. I was good at it. I've always been good at sleeping. I can sleep anywhere. I don't know.
All right. Know. Okay. We get it. That's enough showing off.
I can't stay awake.
Sleep anywhere.
What's your issue?
No, I have the exact opposite. See, you saying that to me is also like people who, and I know this is a genuine problem, but people who face depression and they stop eating and they lose weight. And as someone who has like struggled with my body images my whole life and has just wanted not to eat, I'm like, God damn it. That sounds so great. I hate that.
I lost 15 pounds when I lost my job too. I stopped eating. I didn't think I deserved. I know it sounds crazy, and I know what you're saying. It's like ugh, but it's healthier.
It's terrible.
But yeah, no, but I didn't I didn't feel like I deserved to eat. Plus, I'm lazy. I don't like making food, and I wasn't going in the city to my job that I used to have to buy a sandwich.
It is legitimately awful. It's not it's not something to be jealous of. Anyone being that low that they're not eating is obviously a real problem and a reason for concern. But on a superficial level,
I got super ripped.
Fuck you. Because I'm the exact opposite. Like if I'm going through something, I don't sleep. I can't sleep. Like the anxiety keeps my head going all the time. So I can't really turn it off. And because I'm not sleeping, my body is like, well, you need energy from something. So you should probably eat 3 pizzas. And so it's like, I'm just gaining weight, not sleeping, like into a cycle of being more and more low.
We talked last week with a listener who has been struggling with weight her whole life. We had this really thoughtful discussion.
Was it me?
Well, she's like really obese, and so she got really intimate with it and everything. But I was just wondering, I always love to ask people who do have who will binge or will emotionally eat. Like I know it's such a serious issue, but to I think it's kind of fun to just be like, what do you eat? Like, what's the worst you've ever done? Have you ever done 3 pizzas? Which I recently had 4 slices of pizza after dinner, so I felt horrible about that. But that's nothing.
What's the so I definitely grew up with like disordered eating as the world around me, and my parents are actually both very fit people, but they do that by basically constantly binging and fasting. Like that's really how they structured their world. So I had a very unhealthy relationship with food for a really long time, and it took me a lot of work to like get past that. But because of that, like I internalized that if there is food there that you like, you have to eat it until it is gone. And then when you add like depression and anxiety to that, it's like when there's food there that you like, you have to eat it till it's gone. And when it's gone, you need to get more of that food, because eating food means no one can talk to you. Like you're doing a thing. Yeah. So you're being productive in some way. So you don't have to feel bad about the fact that you're not dealing with whatever the problem is. It's like a way to kind of distract yourself and to focus on something else that became really unhealthy for me too. So I don't know what's the worst. I've definitely made myself sick. Not a lot, but I have made myself, I've eaten so much where I'm just like, out of no joy, out of just like being so anxious and low, that I have gotten physically ill.
Sorry to hear that, but it's so common.
This is a really chipper conversation we accidentally wandered into here.
It's super common. My dog is scratching the door. I'm going to let her in. It's super common, and I think it's always interesting for people to talk about because everybody can relate to it some way or another. But so I also wanted to tell you, let me let the dog in, sorry.
But now I'm stuck just hearing who let the dog in over and over in my head forever, and it's Pete, and it's just, that's going to ruin my day. You ruined my day already.
I'm going to edit only the pause out so we catch that. So I wanted to talk about a bunch of different things, so always, some hard pivots without segues with someone like Maura or Christian, because I love to get her take on all things. So screw you for desiring to segue all the time. Nobody can do that. Okay. So
that was a great segue.
Thank you very much.
I loved it.
And I was drafted by my local town Democrats, recruited, interviewed, and endorsed to run for town council because the person that was running announced in February. Then she got divorced, Maura, moved out of the town. They then replaced her with a woman who a few weeks later they found out had some really serious issues, anti-trans issues.
Oh, wow.
They come to me like the day before the deadline, interview me, endorse me, and then they find out that legally it's too late, apparently. There's a Republican incumbent in the office, and people are urging me to run a write-in campaign. What should I do?
That is rough. Write-in campaigns are really difficult. That's incredibly hard.
Well, I don't think I would ever win, but I don't think it's a few $1,000s that I would raise or something. Put some signs up to set me up for next time and create a community of, people who I at least know are on the same page with some semblance of our values.
No, that's the point of it. It's basically your early campaigning for the next actual run when you can be on the ballot, which is worthwhile, that is worth doing it. Do you want to be on the ballot?
I definitely do.
Then you should do this.
Yeah, I've thought about it a lot, and I've had a lot of, more importantly, people, they came to me. What do you think about someone who has like a lot of ambitions for political office versus someone who didn't really? And people, and this often, I think, is how it happens. The party, the local party, the whatever party, state party comes to you and says, listen, we think, Maura, you'd be great for this office. And what do you think? And that's kind of how it happened with me.
Well, I have complicated feelings on that, in that I basically think that no one who really wants to hold higher office should be allowed to hold a higher office. I feel like that should be a disqualifying thing. Like, if you want it so much, you probably shouldn't have it. Right. However, I also then struggle with the party choosing candidates because obviously they want to stack things in a particular ideological line. But a lot of times at the sort of local level, it is just a desperate search to find anyone who will run for a lot of these things. I know that that's the case, especially when there are Republican incumbents. I know across the board, there's, no one wants to really invest in any of those races because it feels so unlikely that you'll win. So it feels like, no real payout. So ignore it, which is not good. So I think you doing this is fantastic.
All right. So we'll see what happens with that. I'll keep you updated on it.
Can I manage your campaign?
Yes, please. You can, the interesting thing is, you can do things like that, managing campaign from all over the country. That's kind of what's interesting. The stand-up community, people listening to the show, if they've got one guy will make up, a logo, another person will help print it out, and you could do it from all over the country. So I'm not saying, in terms of supporting me, which I hope folks will come up with ideas, but we can all support each other all over the country to run for different things. If you're friends with somebody, like, hey, let me help you with the signs or something. I don't know.
You know, the annoying thing is that the show title is already your like campaign slogan. It's perfect. You're right there. You've done half the work already.
Yeah, well, you know, if the brand is my personality, which is like when I was, you know, little, I got bullied. My brother got bullied, and I hate bullies, and I always stood up to bullies. And I think we should stand up to bullies and injustice. Period. Done. Boom.
I mean, it's a very compelling campaign. Oh, I could manage the heck out of your campaign. I'm coming on board.
Let's go.
Get me a quirky little, you know, campaign hat and a notepad. I don't know if that's still a thing, but I feel like I should have a notepad and a pen.
I really am more interested in your campaign hat.
I don't know why. I guess it was like a sort of 1930s press hat that I saw in my head, but for some reason it went with. I don't know where I'm going.
I saw a red hat. Make Clarkstown something. Stand up again.
I like it.
Okay, so what is? I don't know that we have to spend too much time on this, but what is OnlyFans?
Pete, stop pretending.
I don't.
You know what OnlyFans is.
I swear on.
Oh, yeah, right. You're someone who, like, you walk in and he's got OnlyFans open. He's like, I was just trying, the room was warm and I was looking for a way to cool it down. So I assumed this place would circulate air, and that is why I am here.
Even when you say that, I don't know what it means to have OnlyFans open. Is it an app? I'm looking it up now. I literally waited.
OnlyFans is basically like, I mean, you know what Patreon is, right? So OnlyFans is like that. It's sort of a subscription to an individual, and it is used primarily by sex workers at this point. So if you have a particular sex worker that you really enjoy, you can pay them money on a, you know, monthly basis and have access to whatever content they're putting out.
Okay, so it's like Patreon for OnlyFans, the online creator platform known for its adult content.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the news story, I'm just reading the news story, is struggling to find outside investors according to multiple sources. All right, so can you explain to me what's going on with it this week, or why you're tweeting about it?
Well, OnlyFans, the company just announced that they're going to be limiting the sex work content. They are not going to allow pornography. They didn't go into a lot of detail. There was still something like, oh, you can still have nudes as long as they, meet the criteria, whatever those are. So it's a little bit murky right now what that means. But you have a site. I mean, the site, I think, did not necessarily start out specifically or solely with sex work in mind. I think it started out like, hey, if there are people who like the content you put out, you can nurture that fandom here. It became a place where sex workers were able to be very safe because they were in control of their own content. They weren't necessarily working for someone else. They could set their own boundaries. They could control the interactions that they were having and do it all, you know, digitally, which I guess means something different with sex work, huh? So, via camera.
I get it. No, I get it. So sex workers help popularize OnlyFans, and now OnlyFans is kicking the sex workers off. But so this kind of work is an honest day's work. This is good work. Like we're talking awesome. What's wrong with it?
Well, I mean, this is when this news story first went out. There wasn't a lot of information behind it. And so there was a lot of hubbub about it because, you know, this is the oldest profession, basically, and there's a lot of money in it. We know that there's a lot of money in sex work. Why would anyone who has a successful platform for that choose not to continue? I mean, even just from a purely like capitalist, terrible, you know, profit motive place, they're doing fine. But I shared a thread the other day from a person on Twitter named Post Culture Review who really went into detail about this, and it was really interesting, and was talking about how the motivating factor here really wasn't the outside investors, but was actually the credit card companies and a lot of the evangelical pressure that has been being put on credit card companies. And the credit card companies have said, basically, if you want to use our credit card in certain sites, we now have this huge, long list of things that we have to check for. And you know, the idea is like that it's anti-sex trafficking, which, okay, except that's not ultimately the outcome of the criteria that they're putting in place. That's not actually the effective way to combat sex trafficking. Really, what's happening is you have this puritanical evangelical push to stop any sort of sex work whatsoever.
When I hear them getting up in arms about something sex related, I immediately react with, they're the dirtballs. They're the ones they're worried about.
Oh, God, yeah.
They're
Absolutely.
the ones they're worried about. It's not the rest of us. They're making it harder for us to have sex with whoever we want because that's what they want. That it's all about them and their weird. I have so little respect for the evangelical right anymore because of all the moral bullshit they've been dumping on the rest of the country and controlling populations with, when in reality they're the worst and super racist, the white ones.
Yeah, no, it's a really, I mean, obviously I'm not going to like paint off an entire religion per se, but there are definitely these strains of anti-sex work and of groups that I mean, the right-wing evangelical white specifically, just to be clear. But anyway. Yeah, no, I mean, they're doing a ton of harm across the board, whether the sort of controlling women's bodies issue, wherever it falls, never very helpful or good. But even just on like a very basic sort of cultural level, the amount of harm from, kids basically and young people and even then full-grown adults feeling this tremendous amount of shame and fear surrounding sex because of the way that they frame it, and then having such a hard time navigating that personally, it's really damaging to individuals, and it takes a lot of time and work to like move past that personally. It's rough. It's terrible. Finally, though, you mentioned the oldest profession, but this, just to be clear, this is not what this is. This is a person sitting in the privacy and security of their own home, not having to make themselves vulnerable to being raped or exploited or injured or whatever, right? It's like super safe. I don't know what the sex trafficking issues are or what the negative issues that I would probably, I'm missing, but this is a great thing, I think. It's wholesome. Oh, yeah, no. For sex workers who are able to control their content, I mean, I am only speaking as to what I have read and seen from sex workers, that it has been fairly positive. I mean, if there are complaints or there's, I haven't come across that yet, so I don't know personally, but it seems as though it is. But I mean, what are you laughing at? I'm laughing because I'm thinking about us about to riff on whatever your weird kink is. This is the place for it. And because you've brought up ball crushing a number of times, like it does come up. Yeah. Slash down, comes down right on your balls. You can ask a person on the other end of your video chat to do whatever, and everybody wins or not. Or be like, no, I'm not doing that with a sock. I'm not going to put a sock in my ass. I'm sorry. You don't have to. Yeah, no, you can definitely find, and it is one of those interesting things. Actually, OnlyFans in particular is one where I'm always told like everybody is somebody's kink. But OnlyFans, I'm just like, wow, it is absolutely true. Like every type of person seems to exist there. They have fandoms. It's fantastic. It's really cool, actually. It's very empowering. It seems to be. And funny. I mean, isn't it always also comedy, no matter what? I mean, sex is funny. Of course, sex is always funny. I mean, like the moment you've got, a lot of bodily fluids happening in various places and people having very unique things that they specifically really enjoy. How is that not hilarious? It's fantastic. I just wish you could, like with people that you know pretty well, on your street or in your community, like I wish. Hey, what's your kink? I wish you could. I wish you just knew everybody's, just because I don't know. I don't know what it says, but I would never ask anybody that question. I would be the gay community seems to be much better with that. They have flags, they have whole like subgenres, and people very openly participate in them, right? Like this is what I like. This is kind of what I'm into, and they get to they wear it all. And as straights, we just haven't embraced that, and it's lame. I have a lot of thoughts about that, but I got reprimanded on Friday's show for talking about gay people without any gay people, and they were right. That's fair. Yeah, I was just spitballing anyway. That's fully fair. Is that your kink, spitballing? I as soon as I said it, I was like, yeah. I was like, I'm going to try to keep going, but I felt you were about to nail me. No, another kink. It's. So much is going on. No, here, I don't like spitballing, but I do like I like to be shot in the palms by a nail gun. It's like ultra Christian. Crucifixion, yeah, it's so crucifixion kink. Crucifixion. I bet there's a lot of that. You have a ton of people coming of age in a church staring at that with like a hot, sweaty dude. Come on. That's got to be a whole thing. I haven't stumbled upon it, but I'm sure it exists.
Well,
now I'm curious.
Everybody, Maura's Twitter is @BehindYourBack if you'd like to reach out.
I would like to hear everyone's kink, actually, but please include Pete on that one too.
Yes,
let's
let
all
us know
share
your kink.
kinks.
Make an anonymous Twitter and tweet us both if you're too weird about it.
No pictures though. I don't know what your kink is, and I may not want to see it.
Okay, so another somewhat light subject, but yet important. Jeopardy host Mike Richards, former executive producer, I guess still executive producer of the show, goes on a long search, gets controversial. We all vote for our favorites. And this week you did step up and say you would take the job, which I applaud.
Well, someone had to, Pete. You know, honestly, it was just going on too long.
What are your thoughts on fairly unremarkable white guys and our egos about what we deserve? Because, you know, I looked at this and said, I don't even know who this guy is. And I know most people who would be up for a hosting job because of comedy and because of radio. Like, I'm pretty familiar, and that's a high profile job. Most of the candidates we were familiar with. Who the hell is this guy?
Yeah, apparently this is just the job he always wanted, so he went and bought it, kind of thing. He just decided, well, no, I can do that. This will be fun for me. It's a nice position to be in.
I think there's a larger issue of people looking out for people like themselves. This does happen where you advocate for yourself at work, but I think in a broader sense across our country and other societies and cultures, the idea that I'm going to look for somebody, and based on the fact that naturally my network is people like me, I end up hiring people like me.
/ me. Specifically me. I'm going to hire me.
Yeah, Dick Cheney, looking for GW's vice president. You know what? Why don't you just hire me? He's the Penguin.
That's not how I remember him, but I like that version.
My
of him.
Cheney impression just turns into the Penguin.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that makes sense. That's very much what I heard. See, you should start an OnlyFans for that. I bet that's somebody's kink too.
Done. It's gotta be somebody.
Get in there before they kick you off that site.
All right.
Yeah.
Anything else on Jeopardy? Were you about to say something? I'm sorry.
I have no idea that I was necessarily. I mean, I'm glad that he's getting ousted, though. It is nice to see, basically, because that was just such nonsense.
Ousted. Yeah, the comments that he was, that made on the podcast weren't.
I don't even know what he said. Like, I didn't even hear the controversy. I didn't even care.
On his co-host, his female co-host said that she used to work at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, where there's a bunch of booths, the marketplace in Vegas type of thing. And, they always have often have attractive women out front or whatever to get, douchebags like me to go, what do you got there? Yeah. A drone? And he called her like a booth-stitute and like a booth
babe,
hoe.
That's what I just said. Yeah.
Whatever. And it's like, in that setting, it's funny, whatever. I don't care about that. But maybe you don't get to be Jeopardy host, I guess. I don't know.
Wait, because I just said booth babe. Do you think I just ruled myself out?
No, I think you were allowed to. I think a douchebag guy like me.
Because I was just commenting on what I assumed was
But listen, I just think the standard is, what would Alex Trebek say? I don't know.
That's also an answer.
So, moving on, the most important issue I think I wanted to discuss with you today was how we've got to make sure they don't teach critical race theory in schools. And
thank God you brought it up.
We've got to make sure that they also don't bring masks back. By the way, those are two very separate issues, I think. So I shouldn't.
I feel like you just cut your, an Oppo research ad against yourself there. I don't know that the sarcasm is going to necessarily play. They're just going to clip that. Boom.
It'll work in my district because the bottom line is,
fair enough.
I talked to some people in my community about this the other night that didn't know me and I didn't know them. And they said, what about CRT? And we were at the school and I pointed to the school. I go, you don't have to worry about that because that's not being taught in that building. And if it is, let me know, because I seriously, if it is, I'd like to know, because I don't want to tell people it's not being taught if it is, but it's not. They've never heard of it. What class? Where are they talking about it? It's not. So you have this issue in your school. We all do. It's everywhere. You're seeing the headlines and the viral videos of parents screaming in certain districts, and you might think, well, I'm glad it hasn't happened here. No, it's going to happen if it hasn't at your school board meeting or town council meeting.
I was surprised. I mean, I guess, I was in that kind of naive space of like, oh, I don't think it's going to get here. And then boom, it was here. We have a really fantastic group of parents that started this diversity inclusion task force, basically, as of last year. And they have been doing fantastic work. And they have been suspended, like shut down, because the right has started demonizing them as these critical race theory pushers. And so, there was a school board emergency meeting, and I was in the middle of my vacation day and sat there for 2 hours on the Zoom call waiting to speak to say something. But it was the same sort of point, hey, I know we are very, very proud of our school district. We're all very proud of our elementary school teachers. Critical race theory is a law school class. So no matter how advanced we think our kids are, they're not taking a law school class. That's not what is happening here. This is absurd. And it is just a ridiculous panic that is being spun up in order to just sort of exert more control and intimidate people.
Well, what I really specifically, though, I come to our conversations, yours and mine, with a loose agenda, but there was certainly one specific question that I wanted to ask you, because I think it's super important that when people address the school board or town council, that we almost have a talking point, a line to help people, because I want to go and scream and yell and call these people stupid and say this isn't happening, but I want also, more importantly, to do what's effective. So what kind of, you might have just paraphrased kind of what you said, but I bet you said it a little. What did you, when you got your turn, what did you say to people? Why did you say it? And, isn't the effort to kind of open their mind and to put it at ease, by the way?
Yeah. I went in hot, but I drafted my remarks luckily before they got to me. And I don't have it open in front of me, but I definitely.
That's so key. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I went in hot everybody goes in hot. My heart was racing at the school board meeting where I wasn't.
Me too.
No one was talking, way more than me going on real time with Bill Maher or stand up any night. Why?
Oh my gosh, no, I felt exactly the same. I was and I sat there, I was sitting on the floor of a hotel room with my 2 kids, and I was thinking, I record stuff all the time. I just got off the phone doing an interview with CNBC and, on tax issue things, and I was fine. Why do I feel this grip of tension and fear, basically? I think partially it is because, you're so personally involved. So it is very emotional in that way. And then also partially because it is so immediate. You are speaking to people you are going to see tomorrow.
Yes.
In a way that you don't.
Yeah. If I'm on stage, you're on CNBC or wherever we're at on some national platform, the people you're addressing, you don't see at the grocery store or you don't live next door to. It's these faceless people, or even if it's comedy, see him after the show. That's it.
Yeah, and then I leave town.
Yeah.
Exactly. No, it meant a lot more because, of course, it is your immediate world. And I tried very hard to be very metered and thoughtful and not say anything I wanted to say.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is, obviously I wanted to call them all a bunch of fucking racist dildo.
Exactly.
Yeah, whatever. But if I didn't, I kind of remarked upon the school's motto and its, the things that it has valued. It has a whole value system that it teaches kids, and talked about how the work that was being done was fully in line with what has been done and what we all share as a community, as our values across party line. And then also sort of spoke as well to the fact that there are bad actors who are misrepresenting what is happening, and they are spinning up a lot of fear, and it is unwarranted. And we should look at what the core of what is being done, which is kindness, compassion, empathy. All of the sort of things that we already were teaching our kids that no one had any problem with. And that's sort of the route that I went with my comments. But it was very stressful.
I think that's a great way to say. I think that the best kind of point to make, and this is also the kind of point I was trying to make, was what you just said about it's being created by bad faith folks to really to get ratings. That's what I told these people. I was like, they're just saying stuff on TV. They just say stuff on TV, on radio, to get you fired up, to watch, to get scared. But I'm telling you, they're not teaching that in there. You don't have to worry about it. or better said, what everything that you just said. It's a college level course. That's not. What about the masking situation? Our kids are going back to school. Your kids are unvaccinated because you think there's a microchip. Oh no, it's because they're under 12. But
I mean, let's look. Hey, the other day I woke up and my window, like my curtain on my window, the way the light was shining through looked almost exactly like the Microsoft startup logo. So I'm just saying, I don't know.
Wait, are you saying that because you're vaccinated, you're starting to see the Microsoft logo?
I mean,
that might explain why I'm having a different reaction. I'm actually seeing Bill Gates's face.
Is that when you look in the mirror?
You know what? That was the meanest thing you've ever said to me.
That was so mean. I know. I felt bad saying it, frankly, but I couldn't let it go by.
I look a lot more like Steve Jobs, okay? And I identify with him.
We'll get some black turtlenecks and I'll change my whole viewpoint. But, for now.
I do want your perspective on the fact that your kids they're both under 12, right? So
they are.
So it's interesting to get the perspective of I think most importantly of the parents whose kids are unvaccinated going back to school. Now, my daughters are both vaccinated because they're almost 14 and 16. But with the mask issue, I was talking to Jules and she's like, listen, I'll tell you, I don't know if this is doing it or not, but that mask makes me tired. I just get tired. I go, I think what's making you tired is school. But I don't know. But the bottom line is let's start with nobody wants to wear a mask. Maybe some people love it or it makes them feel safe. But most people don't want to wear a mask. Most of us don't want to send our kids to school to mask. Start there. How are you handling back to school and the mask issue with your kids?
Well, I'm actually really struggling. School is supposed to start this week, and we do not currently have a mask mandate in place, which I find infuriating.
You'd like one.
I would like one. Yeah, my kids are not vaccinated, and there are now variants. Yeah, no, I'm having a hard time. I'm not even sure at this moment in time what I'm going to do because I'm not in one of the I'm not in Texas or Florida, and if I were there, I know exactly I would not be putting my kids in school at this moment. Yeah, because the rates are so high, and you are seeing. There are no pediatric beds available, and that's in hospitals.
And they don't teach evolution.
Terrifying.
And they don't teach evolution, which might be why they.
There's that stuff too. Hey, look, Texas is setting the whole schedule for all of us, so we can't write it off as not being there.
Yep, they lead the agenda on the right.
Yeah, so, and they're writing the school books, so it's a real problem. Yeah, but I'm not entirely sure yet what to do, and I'm still our district. There's a lot of us still pushing to request this mask mandate, and I'm hoping that it will come through in time because I don't want my kids in school without them right now. I think it's too dangerous.
Yeah, but in this case, if you do decide to send your kids to school, you can still say, you can say to your sons, I want you to wear your mask all day.
Oh yeah, of course.
They're not going to tell them they can't wear masks. Is that happening anywhere? I hope not.
It's not. I don't think it's happening in schools. It's definitely. There are businesses that are kicking people out for wearing masks that are that far
masks.
Right. Yes, yeah. There have been several. Specifically in these particular states where you have this type of leadership that is allowing that and encouraging it. But yeah.
But it's okay. So your kids would go. They'd wear a mask, but still other kids might not be. And
yeah, masks are one of those things where you need to have mutual, everybody's kind of has to keep their own breath contained, and it's not as effective if it's just one person existing in that space. But also additionally, if you don't have it as a mandate and you have a bunch of school kids, my kids will wear the mask. My youngest will wear it, no problem. If no one else is wearing a mask in my kid's fifth grade class, will my fifth grader?
That's a great. No, it becomes a divisive thing. It's like yes, I never even thought of that. If my kid's a kid wearing a mask and everybody's gonna, he's gonna feel in any way marginalized about anything ever. You want to try to just be conscious of that.
Yeah, and I mean, even if it's not a direct sort of bullying kind of element, but even just because no one is wearing it or telling him to wear it, you forget to put it back on after lunch. It's a kid who's distracted and goofing around and doesn't have those cues or anyone saying, hey, you need to do this now. And so I have no real faith that he would necessarily be that mindful of it on his own. Why, I don't know. He can't remember to bring his water bottle home most days. I don't know that that's going to be a thought in his head.
Well, I wish you the best of luck on that, and I know you're taking a trip, and I hope you have an awesome trip. And I guess I'll let you go. I don't know. I'll skip Afghanistan. That's the only other thing on my agenda. I know that you also thought you could straighten that out if given the responsibility.
I just think the OnlyFans stuff and the Afghanistan stuff, I don't know what the solution is there, but I think they go together somehow.
Yeah. Maura, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to have Maura Mondays. We love them.
Thank you.
And there goes Maura Quint. You should go on Twitter if you haven't. Give her a follow at Behind Your Back is her Twitter handle, and let her know that you love when she joins us here on Stand Up, and you look forward to Mondays. Something to look forward to Mondays for. How about that? Okay, if you haven't signed up for a subscription to the podcast, please do right now. Sign up for as little as $5. You can always edit your pledge up thanks to those of you who have. And that's it. That's all I've got for you today. Looking forward to a great lineup of guests that I already mentioned earlier on the show, so hopefully you heard that this week. I'll hang out with you on Thursday night this week. Happy birthday to my big brother, if he's listening. He is turning something or other, I guess, age-wise. And I love you, bro, if you're listening. That's all I've got time for. John Carroll has been so gracious with us, with his time and with his talent. And this is our song, You Gotta Stand Up by John Carroll. Go buy it right now. Link in the show notes for it. Here it is.
They weren't even sin. They knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. Is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see them flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and hear